that came out of Tibet. The Kagyu lineage is known also as the practice lineage because we put a tremendous emphasis on contemplative practices of meditation and yogas so that we ourselves can experience directly what the Buddha taught. Lama Yeshe comes to us from Wisconsin, where he is the spiritual director for Hay River Karma Tetsum Choling. He is also the spiritual director for the Karma Kagyu Study Group in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Lama Yeshe completed the traditional 3-year retreat in 1996 under the Venerable Khenpo Kartha Rinpoche, who was abbot of our home monastery, KTD Monastery in upstate New York, and also the founding Lama that actually founded this center, KTC Jacksonville, in 1986. While in retreat, Lama Yeshe received his preliminary monk's vows with His Eminence Taisiti Rinpoche, and then full monk's vows in 2008. Since that time, Lama Yeshe has served as a prison chaplain and as a teacher who visits our home monastery, Karma Triana Dharma Chakra, to give teachings on a regular basis, as well as traveling to other KTC centers around the United States. So we're delighted to have you here this evening, Lama Yeshe. Thank you for joining us and coming all the way to Jacksonville from Wisconsin. I think the weather might be a little milder here than it is probably up in your neck of the woods, but we're delighted that you're here.
Yeah. Well, I'm pleased to be here, and I have told other people that have asked about the weather. It's been extremely warm, almost hot by my standards. I've lived at my place for 52 years. January 9th, 1977, the official temperature was 47 below zero without the wind chill. And it's barely gotten below zero this winter. And there's no snow because it's too warm for it to stick around. People talk about global warming. And anyway, I don't know, but I am presently trying to find my talk here. I thought I had it keyed up, but I am not finding it right now. The heck of a thing if I have to wing it. But I've been known to do things like that. Just gonna go have something else that is similar to that, but I'm gonna look one more time here. I'm teaching you patience. Yeah, here, I'm sure I got it here. There we go. All right. I guess I have to say this too. Maybe this is making excuses. But when I first started using computers, it was punch cards. The computer was in its own 2-story building, and there was a shuttle. And you would leave your pile of punch cards in a place, and then the driver would pick them up, and then 2 days later, you would have your printout back. I even I had a job in college and graduate school working. And one summer, one fall, my boss sent me to IBM in downtown Minneapolis to learn how to program with Fortran. Let's just say, I don't know when Fortran became extinct, but it was a long time ago. So she's passing out the prayers. If you would pass me out a book too. then we will do the Mahamudra winning supplication.
This is the second prayer that's found in your prayer packet. The first prayer is entitled The Verses of the Eight Auspicious Ones, and we'll be reciting the second one, Mahamudra lineage prayer.
Yes. Excuse me. Dorje Chachen, Hello, now,
Yeah.
Well, it was nice to hear everybody chanting. And so tonight's talk is titled Using Life's Manure for Spiritual Growth. And I had an idea. Can you bring up that picture of the manure spreader?
Sure.
So this will give you a better idea of where I'm coming from. I lived at my place for almost 53 years. It's rural. A lot of dairy, a lot of farm animals. Got it?
Yes.
Okay, that's me in a previous life. And I'm loading up a manure spreader. We'll take it out and spread it on the field where it will be used for fertilizer. So this is, for me, talking about manure is like talking about daily sorts of experiences that you have where I live. And so I wanted to give you that background, first of all, for where I'm coming from. I don't have the horses anymore. I don't have any literal manure anymore. And although I have a septic tank and then it gets pumped out every 3 years, and I think they spread it on fields still. I think it's legal to do that, to use it for, again, fertilizer. So that's really the metaphor that I'm using here, that I could go around and ask everybody, what was the most difficult thing that you experienced in January? And probably everybody could come up with something pretty quickly. You wouldn't have to. Oh, I had no difficulties in January. And the idea is, if we can look at these difficulties that we run into in life as opportunities, as a resource, instead of something that we want to get away from, that it can change our perspective, it can change our attitude, and it becomes, the experience becomes very useful. That if we just get impatient, get mad, get frustrated, and so forth, we really haven't learned anything. It's just more of the same old, same old. And I don't know, maybe you like the same old, but I don't. And so if we can have a more positive attitude towards the difficulties in life that we encounter, that we can develop growth, change, and go in a better direction. And the first point that I want to make about this is it's a matter of perspective. That well, I have used this example. How serious is it? How big of a problem is it? And you'll like this. I'll say, well, there's winter. There's winter where I live, and there's winter in Florida. These winters are different. They're both winter, but they're different. And So if we can get a little perspective on the problem, frequently that can calm things down a little bit, because it's so easy to get upset about things that in the long run, especially when we look back on how it really wasn't that big a deal. So what comes to my mind about perspective is the situation in the United States right now with politics and red and blue and yada, 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 yada. And for some reason or other, Florida keeps coming into the news. And so I am going to read a quote by Charles Dickens, the beginning of Tale of Two Cities, which was about London and Paris in 1775. And it was written in 1859. Quite a long time after the actual events happened. But just to refresh your memory, a lot of you know this already. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going directly to heaven. We were all going directly the other way. In short, the period was so much like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on it being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. And I thought that seemed very appropriate for the present situation, that it just seems like one side says it's either got to be this way or American is going down the tubes and ruin, and it's got to be this way or else it's the end of America. Take your pick. Maybe so, maybe not. When things are stressful, it's good to avoid superlatives. I think that's a good way to put it. And to realize that this is not unique, that this is not the first time that things have seemed like they were going to hell or going to heaven or whatever. I used to have an upholstery shop. I did that from 75 to 92. And I remember one time taking the fabric off of a piece of furniture, and there was a handwritten pencil note on the wood frame of the piece, and it had a date on it. I can't give you the exact date, but it was 1942, an early part of 1942. And it said this was made, this date in 1942, in the deep, dark days of the war. Pearl Harbor had happened. The Philippines either had fallen or were about to fall. The Germans had conquered much of Europe. That there was not a whole lot of success either with the European armies against the Nazis or the armies against the Japanese, and it must have looked like hell. And of course, there was the Depression before that. And well, I can't say that it was, it was pretty ugly what happened during the war, but we're here. It wasn't the end of the world. And so it's good to develop a little bit of perspective, of some equanimity, some feeling of I don't have to react to this strongly. I can do more of being aware of what's happening, but not getting sucked up into it emotionally. Something that really jumped out at me while I was a prison chaplain was that part of my job was to orient spiritual volunteers to come into the prison and lead services in their tradition. My job was not to lead services in, the Jewish tradition, Islamic tradition, Catholic tradition, Protestant tradition, Buddhist tradition. That wasn't my job. My job was to find volunteers to come in and have them lead it. So this is different than like an army chaplain or a hospital chaplain. And so I would have to orient these new volunteers. And one of the things that I would tell them is that if an inmate can control your emotions, they can control you. So the idea is that some inmates were very manipulative. My guess was because they grew up in a household where if you didn't manipulate, you were basically in a very harmful, traumatic situation, and you just learn to manipulate to survive. But this goes to everybody, that if a political party can control your emotions, they can control you. If a corporation, through their advertising, can control you, they're going to control how you spend your money. And on and on and on. That if you can't control your own emotions, you have no freedom. You're going to be controlled by other forces. And so this is again part of the manure of our experience, these things that are coming in, and we need to process them in a way that is not only beneficial to ourselves, but beneficial to other people too. That what we do and what we put out into the world affects other people. And we can have, again, using that manure spreader example, we can spread manure too. It's good to spread it on a field, but it's not good to run through a crowd with a manure spreader. Yeah, I learned a lot about doing hobby farming. So anyway, the idea is to grow spiritually, which means to develop our qualities and reduce our faults. There is a saying, which is a seed never sees the flower. And of course, to get the flower, you've got to nourish it. And so it's important that we can use these negative experiences that we have to nourish the growth of the plant, the seedling, and have it flower. And so the idea of change, this idea of a seed growing, the seed has to break. The plant has to escape the seed in order to grow. And so growth means leaving our quote unquote home, our secure place, a place that we feel protected and comfortable in, where you could in a way call it our nest. And so that can cause discomfort because we're going into a new way of behaving, a new way of seeing things, a new way, and so forth. But on the other hand, we're developing character. We're becoming, we're growing, and the characteristics that we are developing are things like honesty, integrity, sincerity, wisdom, compassion, loving kindness, patience, mental stability. I like that one. There's a lot of that that could be, well, let's say it's a resource that is in great demand right now, is mental stability. And then, of course, tolerance, that tolerating even the difficult people. So all of these things, they're workable, and the beauty is that Buddhism gives us methods that we can use to work with these difficult situations and use them for growth, to learn, to develop, to grow, so to kind of sum this part up, attitude is very, very important. Motivation is very, very important. If we can have the motivation to at least try to be beneficial to other people, the bodhisattva motivation, that may my actions be beneficial, even if we come up with this once a day. That's better than maybe it was the day before. Start thinking of other people, and if you came up once yesterday, then try twice today. Keep, you might say, pushing yourself. And to realize that, again, so much of what we are seeing and how we are interpreting what we're seeing is coming from inside. We usually think that it's coming from outside. So this is one of my favorite stories. And since this is a new, most of you haven't heard this story, I can tell it again. People back home, I think, are tired of me saying this story. But this happened, this was back in the late 80s. This goes way back. And it was in a bar. This was long before I was a monk, long before I did 3-year retreat. A friend of mine who, Vietnam veteran, had a big beard. He is a gunsmith. He likes hunting. And had a gun shop in a little town called Dallas, Wisconsin. Not Dallas, Texas. It's probably maybe 400 people. Yeah, the towns are a little smaller. The town closest to me is 258. That's where I live. I moved out there to get away from big cities, and I succeeded. But anyway, he moved out to the country like me to get away from the big city, to have privacy. He has a lot of land, and he likes being out in nature. And sometimes in the summertime, he'll ride a bicycle to work, even though he could take his motorcycle or his car. So he's on his way home from work one sunny late in the afternoon, and there in this country road, he sees a bag of trash, and he gets angry at people throwing trash out their window as they're going through these country roads, not giving a darn about nature, about other people's feelings. And I will not use the exact language he used. Remember, it was Saturday night at a bar. We'd had a few beers. Now, to continue his story, because he was kind of perplexed in a way, this made an impression on him. And when he rode up to the bag and saw the bag, he realized it wasn't a bag of trash, it was a bag of fresh groceries. And instantly he was no longer angry because now it was his bag of fresh groceries and he was very happy. And so he stopped and picked up the bag, got on his bicycle and started to ride home. And then very quickly he realized that it was too big, bulky, and heavy for him to ride and carry on a bicycle. So now he was not happy because he was going to have to leave his bag of fresh groceries on the side of the road and someone else might find it. And so he said he thought about it and he put it in the brush out of sight so no one else could find his bag of groceries. And now he's a little paranoid and he gets on his bike and rides home quickly, gets in his car, comes back, stops, goes into the brush, is relieved to find that the bag is still there. And now he's happy again and he goes home. The point being, that bag did nothing. It just lay there on the ground. It did nothing. That every emotion that he was experiencing, he was projecting onto the bag. And it's easy to see this in other people, but it's even more profound to look into the mirror and see when we do it. That's when change starts happening. That's when we start to grow spiritually, when we see ourselves doing this. And I never talked to him. I did more listening than I did talking to him. He never realized that it was just him projecting onto this inanimate object. But like I could speculate, he could have left the bag on the shoulder where someone that would come back looking for their bag could find it. He could have given it to a food bank. The post office in Ridgeland has it's a small post office, first of all, but they have a table in the lobby where they have the post office boxes that you can rent. And on that table, you can put food. And a person comes in and is hungry, they can take the food off of that table. There's no supervision. There are rules that you can't put food there that's unwrapped or it needs refrigeration. They want packages for safety and so forth. But you could put a bag of groceries there and it would go. Well, lots of things, but it was his bag of groceries. So there's a lot going on here with that simple little bag of groceries laying in the middle of the road. So it's good to think about that. Good to, when we are getting our emotions worked up, kind of take a step back and try to look from a new perspective. And what am I adding to this, and what maybe can I avoid adding to this? The traditional Tibetan analogy is that you have a view from the bottom of a very narrow valley, or you have a view from the top of the mountain looking down on that valley. And the one from looking down is very spacious, and you're seeing, you might say, the bigger picture. And at the bottom of the valley, it's not spacious, it's cramped, and there's not much room to move around. A more modern analogy might be a drone view. an unarmed drone now, but a drone with a camera on it that is way up in the air, and you can see a bigger picture. Could you put that a matter of perspective up there? This is a first for me. I could use him at home, but I think he's already committed.
It's, which one is that? Which one is that, Lama?
That's the one of, you know, the cylinder and the square and the circle.
Oh, yes. Give me one moment because that might take a second, but you can
Yeah.
continue and I will find it.
I will be patient.
All right. For some reason, that one did not. Oh, here it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
We go. So you can see from an aerial view or a bigger view, you see that it is both square and round and cylindrical. That does not make sense because I gave you three perspectives and they said both. Well, you get the idea. Yeah, so anyway, it's good to realize that we often do not see things clearly, and to give ourselves a little space to get a fresh perspective, to see things differently. Then from there, since I was talking about manure as being a resource, I thought I would go back to talking about gardening. And so I titled this section, The Garden of Your Mind. And so in the garden of our mind, we need to water the seeds of our qualities, such as loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom. And we have these present because we have Buddha nature. It's not a matter of getting these from outside ourselves. It's a matter of developing them from inside. That this is the way Buddhism works, that because we have the same Buddha nature as the Buddha, it is developing these, nurturing them, growing them. And so we need to water these qualities. We need to fertilize these qualities. And again, manure is an excellent fertilizer if it's used properly. Sometimes you have to compost it. And this is the 7 points of mind training. If you're familiar with that, but the 7 points of mind training, in a way, it is very brief because it's working with our experience in such a way to develop and to use our negative experiences to come out with positive results. And the other is that we have to avoid watering our faults and avoid fertilizing our faults. That's easy to do too. I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, the problem with ordinary beings is they think their faults are qualities, that they think like getting angry is necessary, that it's virtuous. I was right to tell that jerk what I thought of him, yada, yada, yada. So we have to be careful in that respect. And then the next point that I have down here is that we want to pay attention so that we can clearly see our faults and our qualities, the distinguish between the two of them. That if we're not clear about that, then we will end up cultivating our faults and nourishing our faults and developing our faults. So the faults cast shade seems to be a word that has more meaning in the present. But I'm still going to use it. That cast shade on the plants that you want to grow, and it steals nutrients from what you want to grow. I have done a lot of vegetable gardening. I have not done much the past few years because I have a tendency to, at the wrong time, take a trip to go somewhere else. And if you can't be there when it's ready to eat, it gets pretty pointless. Or if you're not there to weed, which is going back to what I'm talking about here. If you don't have time to take care of the plants that you are gardening, then you're kind of wasting your time. So it takes constant care. And we want to make sure that the weeds don't steal the nutrients from the qualities. That we want to be careful about that. It takes mindfulness, and it takes diligence, and it takes being willing to maybe sometimes work a little bit harder than you think you're capable of. For instance, when you're planting, that, well, where I live, the weather is a little less forgiving than here. And, you just have to plant at the right time. There's an old farmer saying, which is make hay when the sun shines. You can't make hay in the rain. You can't make hay at night. So you've got to do things at the right time. And so then to go on from there, we need to have our awareness of what's going on inside, that we all have what I call an inner critic. We have an inner voice it's that voice that's telling you, I'm doing things, I'm screwing up. I'm not as good as other people, yada, yada, yada. We all have that inner critic. Maybe telling you that this scares me over here, so I'm going to go over here where I feel a little more comfortable. There's not so much fear. And we need to listen to that inner critic to get to know that inner critic. And a lot of times, instead of getting to know the inner critic, we try to ignore it. And when I came to Buddhism, I was suffering from depression. And one of the things that got me out of the depression was getting to know my inner critic. And it was telling me all kinds of things. And I realized that if I had a friend or even an enemy that talked to me like that verbally, I would cut off the relationship. I would do whatever I could to never see that person again. And here I am living with myself, telling myself that all the time. And that was for me a very important, observation. And for some reason or another, a friend of mine showed up one day visiting me. He said, I've got this really funny poster here that I'm going to give you. And it said, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And then underneath it in small letters was the management. And the light bulb went off. And I hung that up on my bulletin board. I'm living alone. I wasn't a monk, but I'm living alone. And eventually, when after that inner critic had kicked into high gear, eventually I would see that and kind of laugh it off, you know, like, this is a great self-improvement program. It would be like a weight loss program that what you do is you stand in front of a mirror naked and you look at how fat you are and you tell yourself you're fat and ugly, and that's going to cause you to eat less. Oh, sure. If anything, you're going to eat more to console your hurt feelings. And so it is getting to know that inner critic, and that one that punishes you, condemns you, and so forth, and realize that it's giving you bad advice. That this isn't news, this is opinion. And to realize that sometimes your friend gives you bad advice and you don't have to follow it. I think all of you have had friends that had given you bad advice at one time or another. And so if you can start taking that attitude, well, yes, I hear you, but I don't agree with you. That this is a very biased viewpoint. Michael and I talked a lot today, and Mike and Jen we talked a lot, and one of the things that I brought up was that my grandfather was a Swedish immigrant. This is something that Michael and I have. He's got his father was Swedish. And, but my grandfather was a butler for a famous newspaperman in Chicago, who owned the Chicago Tribune. And this newspaperman was rabidly against the New Deal, the Roosevelts, and everything else that had to do with the Democratic Party. That famous picture of Truman holding a newspaper that said Dewey wins, that was the Chicago Tribune. And I went to Eleanor Roosevelt's library out by Hyde Park, New York, and they had a lot of stuff there about this newspaper. The point that I'm getting at is, look at it a bit like that. This newspaper that is very opinionated and is giving a very biased version of what the news was. I did a little research. You can Google anything these days. And for the man was Colonel McCormick. And some famous person was quoted in his Wikipedia listing as saying he was a very liberal person for the 14th century. Now, on the other hand, my grandfather died when my father was 17, and he put my father through college, including graduate school. So, you know, he had a heart for some people. But the point being is you don't want to be that inner critic. You have to realize that it's giving a very biased opinion and it's not an accurate opinion. So listen to it and then maybe laugh it off. That realize that it's just one way of looking at life or living, looking at myself. If you don't, it'll keep you from growing, keep you from developing. So your flower will never reach its potential if you walk all over it, if you throw trash on it, and do all kinds of other things that will be harmful to the plant. So that's the analogy of working with a garden of your mind. So it's important to kind of develop an aversion for being angry at yourself. Avoid hating yourself for being angry at yourself. That it's easy to, oh, there I go again. I see it. I keep screwing up. That you want to avoid that. You want to see it. There I go again, but I could be better than that. I could be trained. Even a dog, or maybe possibly a cat, can be trained. They have cats. And so we can be trained too. And this is, again, where we start with meditation, is by sitting on a cushion, following our breath, and when we're interrupted by thoughts, that eventually you bring your mind back to the breath, and that naturally you let go of the thought. So meditation is a good foundation practice to start. And again, when you're meditating, if you find that then you've been 10 minutes, 20 minutes before you come back and realize, oh, I haven't been following the breath. Well, just come back to the breath. There's no point in getting mad at yourself. Oh, I can't meditate. There I go again. That's just more thought. And so drop it. Drop it. It's simple. So let me see here. So this goes back to my example of telling the volunteers at the prison to not be controlled by the inmates controlling your emotions. And there was one inmate there that I was a chaplain from 2003 to 2011. And he at least claimed he was from New Orleans, and that he had relatives that were there for Katrina, and had all kinds of sad stories about what happened during the hurricane. But the thing was that the stories changed with different volunteers. And so you wanted, that was part of control. Oh, I feel so sorry for you. You've had such a hard da. So it was, again, to avoid being controlled. It was like, well, maybe so, maybe not. And a lot of times in life, it can be maybe so, maybe not. That you could say the jury is still out. There is a story, and it's about horses. So I think this is a good story, since I just had some horses up there. And it's a Tibetan story. So so in Tibet, in old Tibet, horses were very valuable, very important. And so this nomad, he got up one morning, and a wild stallion had gotten into his corral, and he very stealthily went over and closed the gate. And so now he had a wild stallion that would be primed for breeding with his mares, good genetic stock. And the villagers came up to him and, oh, how fortunate you are. This is a very valuable horse. Yada, yada, yada. And he said, well, maybe so, maybe not. And so the next day when he got up, he found that the stallion had broken the corral and had left with all of the nomads' ponies. And now the villagers came and, oh, how sad this is. You've lost all your horses. This is a very severe blow to you financially. And what are you going to do with horses? You're going to have to buy horses. Maybe so, maybe not, he said. Well, the next morning when he got up, the stallion returned with the nomad's horses and his own herd of mares. And again, he closed the corral, and now the villagers came. You're the wealthiest man in the whole area. You have all these valuable horses, and you can breed them, and oh, you are so fortunate. Well, maybe so, maybe not. Well, that afternoon, his son tried to break the stallion, and the stallion threw the son, and the son broke his leg. Now the villagers came to console him, because who's going to help you with the spring chores? Yada, yada, yada. Oh, that's so terrible. And, well, maybe so, maybe not. And the next day, the Mongol army came. And just like they do today in Africa, they took every young man in the village forcefully to be in their army. But the son with the broken leg had no use to them, and they left him. Yeah, the point being is you never know how it's going to end. So I have a sense of humor. So I'm going to quote a famous yogi. It ain't over until it's over. You've heard of Yogi Berra. I couldn't resist. So I am going to open it up to questions and answers here in a minute. I just got a couple of more points to make. I thought I'd talk a little bit about anxiety and worry. There's probably nobody here that ever has any anxiety or worry, but just in case. Here is my own personal story. Now, I had this prison chaplain job, and it did have one drawback, and that was it was an hour and 45-minute drive to work. Yeah, and so I had to be there at 7:45. And so that meant leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not a morning person, so sometimes I would leave after 6 o'clock in the morning. And the parking lot, of course, the warden's office had a window looked right out of the parking lot. Now, I could spend an hour and 45 minutes worrying about, am I going to get there on time? If I wanted to. And there were times when I probably spent a lot of that hour and 45 minutes. Am I going to get there on time? And when I would get there on time, it was occasionally the warden would wave to me out the window, so I knew he could see me. And I had a good relationship with the warden. But the point is that I could only be late once. But I could worry about it for an hour and 45 minutes. I think you're getting the point here about worrying and anxiety. That if you look at it from that angle, maybe a lot of worry and anxiety is unnecessary. If you can learn to work with your mind and let go, that you're not accomplishing anything by worrying. Here is an example. It doesn't take much for me to hold this cup of tea up. But if I hold it up for 45 minutes, it gets heavier every minute. If I hold it up for 8 hours, my arm is probably going to have spasms. And maybe another 8 hours, I'm going to have to go to the ER. And it's like that when we hold on to things and worry about them over and over and over again. We're not accomplishing anything. And it doesn't make any difference, but we think that it's important. We can't let our minds go to some other subject. We can't drop it. So think about that. And at least being aware of this is going in the right direction. Everything that I've said tonight, just being aware of these things is going in the right direction. Awareness is so important. If you don't see it, if you're not aware of it, you're not going to see it. If you don't listen, you're not going to hear. And so being aware is really a very important part of working with our minds. And by the way, I never got reprimanded for being late. And I was late a few times. I retired when I was getting close to 66. And I can tell you this, that the prison job was a very enjoyable job, a very interesting job. I liked it. I usually left home happier than when I got there, partially because it was so early in the morning. But I could tell stories, and that it was a very interesting job. I met interesting people, both inmates and staff. And I've continued to work as a volunteer. And thanks to COVID, they now do Zoom visits. Tuesday, I'm going to do a Zoom visit to the prison from Florida. Things change. Anyway, just to kind of wrap this up, it's good to learn how to manage our anxiety and our worries better, and to learn how to let go. Again, this example, it's really very simple. Just put the cup down, and then no problem on the arm. So meditation can help you learn to put your worries down. And it doesn't mean don't do anything about it, but use some wisdom and work at what really is going on, rather than just worrying, and going over the same thing in your head over and over again. And when I first got involved in Buddhism and went out to KTD, that's where I met Michael. Was 1989. We're not that old, friends. met him at KTD and, but, about that time, they were in the old building and the old dining room. And for some reason, they had a pop machine. I don't know, here they might call them soda machines. Coke machines, yeah. That was there by the dining room. You remember that, Michael?
I remember.
Yeah, so it was a very important teacher to me because one day I saw Toku Rinpoche go over to this machine, put money in it, and he, was there were Kempo Karta Rinpoche, Toku Rinpoche, the two Tibetan Rinpoches that were there, very worthy of respect and honor and devotion and so forth. A VIP in English language, and he put money in that Coke machine. Nothing came out. Don't get no respect. So, yeah, don't think if you become a great practitioner, the Coke machine is going to work when it won't for other people. And so don't expect to get, people treating you the way you think you should be treated. But it makes that you are more able to work skillfully with difficult people in difficult situations. So, but that really, for me, I got that lesson pretty quickly. Oh, yeah, darn. Finally, I guess this will kind of lead into tomorrow. My definition of a plan. A plan is a well thought out fantasy. And on that note, any questions?
I'm not sure how to phrase it or articulate it. Earlier when you were talking about the reactions that we have from the inside to not just politics, but like maybe someone saying something bad about someone else, whatever. Are we fooling ourselves if we tell ourselves, okay, I don't care. If you tell ourselves I don't care, is that like, are we, you know what I mean? Like when I watch the politics and my friend will call and say, oh my gosh, did you see this? Or did you hear this? And I'm like, no, I don't care. Really, I don't have a estimate. I don't care. But now sometimes I'm wondering, do I really not care? Or is that me trying to keep myself safe from being emotionally involved or invested in anything like that?
Well, I had a neighbor that, his ancestors came from Germany. And he told me this one time, and I think it came partially from his German background. And it was, I keep my eyes open and my mouth shut. And I'm not saying exactly like that, but keep your eyes open, your ears open, and try to avoid developing negative opinions of the people that are telling you these things or these things that you're seeing.
Right.
And perhaps you can develop some compassion for them. And at least some empathy, realize that they're saying these things because they're really suffering. They talk about this ocean of samsara, and it turns out, well, when I was young in high school, I liked swimming. I really liked swimming. And I got my water safety instructor certificate from the Red Cross. And so you're trained at how to rescue a person that is drowning. And a person that's drowning is panicky. If you get close to them, there's a good chance that they will grab a hold of you and try to get on top of you to keep themselves out of water. And so to use this metaphor of the ocean of samsara, there are all these people drowning in the ocean of samsara that are panicking. And as a result, they will do very harmful things. And so you have to be careful, but you also want to avoid harming them, and maybe you can do something to benefit them. Now, one of the instructions with water safety instructions, which I don't recommend to do as a Buddhist, is you hit them in the face. And then if they calm down a little bit, then you grab them and pull them shorter. We have this term called skillful means. And so skillful means. And again, I'll tell you a funny situation that I was in. I told this to these two Michaels here, and they got a laugh out of it. Again, where I live, it's very rural. I fit right in. And I was at this store. It's a chain store, but it's just in Wisconsin and maybe a few areas that are just outside the border. It's called Farm and Fleet. Does that sound agricultural? And among other things, you can get a fresh set of tires, brake job, and so forth there. And the waiting room was just a hallway, a wide hallway, and they had chairs like these that you're sitting in there, and here, and then just enough space between them where the person could walk through. And I'm sitting there in my robes. I do not wear this to Farm and Fleet, but I wear the rest of the robes there. And so there's all these rural men and waiting, and so some of them are talking, and finally, suddenly one man looks up from across to me, and it would be like he was sitting on the other side of that table. And he said, "How do you feel about gay marriage?" I maybe thought that my robes, I was a cross-dresser. I don't know. And so I just looked at him calmly and said, "I have no opinion." And then there was a man over there, and he looked at me and said, "You are a wise man." So sometimes it's just not saying much of anything. And the fine print of "I have no opinion" is that I didn't say, "I have no opinion that I want to share at this point in this place." So I hope this helps. Yeah. Anything else?
Is there anything when you are dealing, when that anxiety comes and you're in the thick of it and you recognize it for what it is, but what can we do in that moment to better deal with it? Obviously, if we haven't trained in meditation for years and years and years and have the stability that we need to tackle it right then and there. Is there something as Buddhists that we can do when it is there and it feels real to us?
Well, this is a good question. And I don't know if I can give you a good answer, but I'll try. Here is a kind of an analogy or analysis that we have this ego. You probably heard about the ego, this idea of a self, a permanent self that has some kind of an independent identity. And it's amazing how we think that it's permanent, unchanging and everything, but how fragile it is at the slightest possibility of it getting poked or pricked or pinched, and so forth. It's like the fear and anxiety arises. And you could say that, so we've got this ego, this idea of a self, a permanent self, and we've got a barrier around it. Inside of that barrier is my territory. Outside of the barrier is other territory, not my territory. And the barrier is fear. When fear arises, you've reached the edge of your territory. And so this requires some discipline, but it is doing something that goes beyond your territory, even if it's a little thing, trying something a little different. That, well, okay, I'm afraid this fear is coming up. Let's see if we can work with it. Manure Rinpoche, he had anxiety disorder. I don't know if you're aware of this. Yeah, he had anxiety disorder. And he said that basically what happened was he made friends with it. And then by making friends with it, getting to know it, that it didn't actually really cease to be a problem until he was in 3-year retreat. I'm not suggesting you have to do a 3-year retreat, but to get to know it, get to realize when it's coming up, and then realize that what he said advice that his father gave him was, you're walking on a path and you come to a stone wall. What do? You throw your backpack over first, because then you've got to get over the wall. And here is my example of getting to know the fear. And it has to do with the Wizard of Oz, of all things. I could use traditional Tibetan examples, but heck, we're Americans here. You've all seen the Wizard of Oz, and there is a scene, and you can Google it on YouTube and find it, where Dorothy and her friends go into the wizard's castle, and they all want something. And so you have this projection of this fearsome face on a wall, and there are streams of flame shooting up below it and on each side of it, and you have this loud booming voice coming over in the film, and they're all shaking and afraid and so forth. But not Toto, the dog. Toto goes over and pulls his curtain back, and there's this old gray-haired man speaking into a 1935 microphone, and he's got levers that he's pulling. And Dorothy sees him, and he sees Dorothy, and he goes to the microphone. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And it's up. It's too late. Dorothy figured it out. Her friends figure it out. And so this is just reinforcing what I said already. Pay attention to the man or the woman behind the curtain. And the more you can see what's actually going on, the more you can free yourself from the anxiety. So your assignment is to watch this 2 minutes clip on YouTube tonight.
Okay.
I can really be a tough llama. Any other questions? Yes,
So I have a lot of feelings about things that are happening just around the world, not in my immediate vicinity. Is the correct attitude about this, about all of the things that make me very sad or angry or whatever the emotion is the correct attitude to take that one of the no bad, where it may be good, it may be bad, and it's not for me to decide?
well, it is good to, again, be aware. But on the other hand, you can be too aware. There's so much 24/7 news, and so much of the news is coming from it's not objective. That you have things that are very, very conservative. And then you have also channels that are very, very let's just say very simply, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. And it's very seldom, it's harder to find something that's in the middle. And you can get too much news. I probably watch too much news. So it's good to pay attention to the news, but on the other hand, pay attention to how much you can handle. I was once asked the question, I get nightmares when I watch horror movies. Well, of course, the answer is don't watch horror movies. And so Thich Nhat Hanh, he talks about actually going on, quote, a diet, unquote, of what you're feeding your mind. That it might be better to listen to a Karmapa talk than it is to watch the news. That for my group, we have been studying Interconnected by Galwa Karmapa. And it's an interesting book because he talks about issues. And he talks about that, first of all, we have to gather information. And then from that, we can have an emotional response. And then that, which is, again, has a lot to do with intellect. But then we bring it into our heart and develop true compassion and loving kindness and so forth, and then we're motivated to act on that impulse. A lot of times when you're watching the news and reading opinions and so forth, it's fear that we're responding to. Oh, this could the end of the world as we know it. And well, that part is maybe so, maybe not. But it isn't, don't become inactive. Don't blot it out, but don't let it get the better of you. And try to have, basically, we need wisdom and we need skillful means. And Karmapa says, and in Tibetan iconography, wisdom is female and skillful means is male. And both male and female human beings have both qualities. And Karmapa says, we need more wisdom today in this world. So let your wisdom come out. Any other questions? Well, I got about 8:28. I think that's about time to dedicate the merit. Shall we do the short dedication here on page? It says page 8. This is what I like about these things. Page 8, which is really the back of the book.
I'll start with Sanjay Kusum, about 3 pages from the back.
Yeah, 2 pages from the back. But before that, I would like to dedicate merit, and we can all take turns who we want to dedicate merit to. I would like to dedicate merit to the Middle East, that they need a lot of merit there. That there is so much anger and fear and killing and violence and so forth. And also one of my students, her name is Sabella, that's having a lot of physical and mental issues. So, do you have anybody?
Dedicate merit of this practice to all the gun violence that we have living through this nation.
I don't think I can put more of this to Ukraine. There's something so wrong.
I would like to dedicate the merit to my friend who is putting father in hospice today.
Dedicate the merit to alcoholics and suicide.
Casey? I'm just gonna go around the room if you have nothing to pass.
I'd like to dedicate this merit to my children and to my friend and Anel, who is struggling with fertility.
With what?
Fertility. She's going through some treatments. I'd like to dedicate the merit to my bookstore girlfriends who have supported me in their role for going through a hard time, having a hard time staying afloat. To dedicate merit to them.
I'd like to dedicate merit to all the LGBTQ plus children and adults that are living in fear right now and being persecuted.
I'd like to dedicate merit to the healing of our environment and to all sentient beings in whatever form they take, that they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, and to my mother.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Sanjay Kusum Well, that completes this evening's program. I thank you all for coming. May you all benefit from this program tonight.
Lama Yeshe, thank you so much for sharing these teachings with all of us. And thank you everyone for being here, supporting one another in practice and study. We're going to continue this weekend as Lama Yeshe is going to share teachings on emotional healing. So this will happen both Saturday and on Sunday. We'll begin registration at 9 tomorrow morning. Teachings will happen between 10 and noon, and again at 2 and 4 in the afternoon. If anyone is interested in receiving refuge, that is the ceremony by which one formally becomes Buddhist, that also would be offered. That would take place at 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. If you are seeking refuge, if you could please speak with one of the folks here at the center so that we can help coordinate that with you. Then Sunday, we'll have the same schedule, the 10 a.m. to noon and 2 to 4 p.m. to conclude the teachings on emotional healing. We hope that you'll all join us. And thank you very much again for being here so much. Thank you, Lama Yeshe. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I want to say I enjoyed the questions. I like questions. So thank you.